What's up everybody, Ben here back with another video. So recently I rebuilt my computer and it reset all of my steering wheel settings for Project Cars 2, so I thought this would be a good time to go back and look at my old settings and maybe re-examine them, do a new video. I've learned quite a bit since I did them originally, so these will be my updated steering wheel settings for Project Cars 2. This is both steering wheel and force feedback. My rig, if you don't know, is a Logitech G27. I have the H pattern shifter and the 3 pedals. If I need it, I have a Logitech flight stick here that I can use as a handbrake. On PC, Project Cars 2 is really good. You can have multiple inputs, so this USB flight stick and my USB wheel will both work together. Alright, so I'm going to break this up into 2 parts. I'm going to have a set of PC settings with the profiler, and I'm going to have a set of console settings that are entirely done in the game for the force feedback. Let's first talk about how to set the wheel up. There's not actually a lot we have to do. There's only a couple of tips I have if you have a Logitech wheel. As always, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button. Let me know. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. I do lots of sim racing content and some other stuff too. And make sure you hit that notification bell. That'll let you know when my latest videos and streams come out. Alright, let's go through it. Alright, so when we're in Project Cars 2 here, we come up to our options and we have our controls here. So I use the Logitech G27. As I said, I have the H pattern shifter and 3 pedals. So if you have an H pattern and a clutch pedal, you want to make sure you turn automatic clutch off. That's going to enable any car that has a manual gearbox, you're going to need to use the clutch. When you go to check on a car, it tells you if it has a H pattern box or a sequential box. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you calibrate your wheel. So turn the steering wheel to its maximum extent. Alright, so we've done that. Now we're going to hold it at a 90 degree and push finish. And there we go. Next is your pedals. You're going to want to push them all the way to their maximum. And you can push it down and let it back. It just detects where the maximum range was and save. I found that with my Logitech wheel on PC, there's some issues when I start the game up. Sometimes the pedal calibration is off. I unplug my wheel pretty frequently and move it. So this might be part of it, but one thing you can do is always make sure you calibrate your pedals when you start playing the game. Every time, it just makes sure that everything is working properly. Okay, the next thing is our wheel configuration. We have all these settings here. Let's go down the list. Steering dead zone. This will put some dead zone into the steering where it won't detect movement. If you have a really loose wheel for some reason and you find that you're weaving back and forth, you might need 1 or 2 clicks of dead zone, but I wouldn't put much more than that. Sensitivity is normally at 50, and this makes the in-game wheel line up with your wheel. I found that Project Cars 2 is pretty good. I have it down to 48 just because I have a little bit of play in my wheel. It's a bit older, so I was getting a little bit of weaving, so I just turned it down just a tiny bit. I will show you how we can deal with steering in the car setup page a little bit later. Project Cars 2 dynamically adjusts the degrees of rotation, so if you have a 900 or 1080 or whatever wheel, it will adjust that rotation depending on the car you're driving. So if you're driving an old car, an old road car, it will give you the full 900 degrees, where if you're driving like a Formula A or a prototype, it will make the steering lock much shorter like it is in the actual car. So you don't need to worry about any of that. On the throttle side, 5 dead zone is standard. I leave that in there just because my pedals are old and not always clean, so you want to avoid any false inputs. Sensitivity I haven't touched for the throttle. The brake pedal. Okay, on the Logitech pedals, there's a few issues with the brakes. The brakes are way too sensitive. There was about 7 dead zone in there by default. I backed down to 5, but I've decreased the brake sensitivity. This means that that initial push doesn't give as much braking force. This is a big problem with the Logitech pedals, so knocking it down to 40 is good for me. And then I do the rest of the adjustment in the brake pressure on the specific car, because it varies by car. Clutch, haven't had to touch. I don't like a speed-sensitive wheel. If you know what that is, then you should touch it. If you don't, I wouldn't. Controller damping, we don't need to worry about that. We're not a controller. If you have a set of rev lights and gear display on your wheel, you should turn that on. That's pretty much it for setting up the wheel itself. Some useful buttons that you might want to map. Brake bias, of course, you're going to want to be able to change those. And here in the assistance, increase force feedback volume, decrease volume, increase tone, and decrease tone. These settings can be helpful when you're fine-tuning the steering force feedback for your own likes. I'm going to teach you not just what I use, but also how to set it up for yourself. So these can be useful when you're doing that. I mentioned brake pressure and steering rack just a second ago. I like to not turn the brake sensitivity way down. I like to adjust the brake pressure on the car individually. Each car is different, if they have ABS or if they don't, or how cold the brakes are. Remember, when the brakes are cold, they're going to be more grabby, so you're going to get locking until they warm up. So adjusting the brake pressure here on a car-by-car basis is a better bet than just a blanket lowering of the brake sensitivity too low. The other thing is the steering ratio. So this is how quickly the wheels move depending on how much input you put in. I like pretty fast steering, so this is how you can adjust it. So basically, as it says, this is the number of degrees of steering wheel movement required for 1 degree of front wheel movement. A higher ratio, so if we went up to like 15, would mean we would have to turn the wheel more to get 1 degree of wheel movement. And if we go lower, the steering is faster and we have to turn the wheel less to get it. It'll be a little more twitchy though, and you may be weaving back and forth. So the steering ratio is a good way to adjust each car. Okay, so force feedback. This is going to be the most personal to the individual driver. Everybody likes something a bit different. The goal of this video is not to tell you just what I use, but to teach you what these settings actually do so that you can set it up for your own specific wants and needs. One important tool that will help you in setting up your force feedback is the telemetry screen. So if you switch the HUD modes, you have a couple of different HUD modes that you can adjust, but one of them is this telemetry screen. And very importantly, down in the bottom left here, we have our steering wheel. It shows our turning. And then we have our pedals inputs on the right and the left, the red and the green. Red is brake, green is gas. Then we have this little wavy line down here next to some numbers. That wavy line is our force feedback graph. This is going to be important because it's going to tell us what forces are going through there. As you can see, as I go over a curb here, it's jagged, as it's a serrated curve. But the main thing is that we need to avoid clipping. So clipping is when the force feedback graph goes to the top. It's basically too much input for it to output anything that is meaningful. Clipping is bad, and it basically washes out your force feedback. So this graph can help us avoid that, but my settings that I'm going to show you pretty much avoid clipping unless you go into like a giant crash or something like that. Force feedback comes in what they call flavors. They have informative, immersive, and raw. Depending on your steering wheel, these are going to do different things. The Logitech wheel has some benefits. It's pretty durable, it's cheap, reliable. I've had mine for 8+ years now. But it has a geared force feedback system, which one gets hot, and two can be loud when you have a lot of force feedback going on. I don't like a heavy wheel. Some people, especially newer people, think, oh, I'm gonna go to the raw setting because that's, real and whatever. It's not. We're playing with a facsimile of a real car, right? Force feedback is turning vertical movements into left and right movements of the wheel and vibrations. So we have to deal with that. What we want from our force feedback is we want information. We want to know what the car is doing and therefore how we need to adjust, if we're sliding, if we're going over a bump or a hill, how much throttle should we be using, yada yada. So I go with the informative. The force feedback in Project Cars 2 is too strong by default. The wheel is very heavy, and it's really hard to turn. That's not like there's a lot of forces going through it, it's just that the wheel has a lot of resistance. I don't like that because that makes it hard to snap adjust to oversteer moments and things like that and correct. So what I've done is I've built both of my profiles, the PC version and the console version, off of the informative flavor. So let's start with the console settings. These work on PC as well, and they don't require you to adjust the Logitech profiler at all, so having it all done in-game can be handy. So let's start with the game. This is just the overall force feedback strength and feel. By default, all of these are 50. I find that with the Logitech wheel, it's too much. The wheel gets hot. That's bad. It's going to decrease the longevity of it. And it's very chattery and hard to turn and just kind of giving a lot of feedback. If you have feedback that's too strong, like say you hit a bump, it's turning the wheel to indicate, hey, I hit a bump. If that goes past a certain point, it's actually going to turn the wheels, and that's bad. So we don't want the force feedback actually causing inputs to the car. 42 is what I'm using right now. I've tested this with a variety of different cars. Each car is different, so formula cars feel different than prototypes, than GT3, than historics. So I'm actually using a range of gain. It's kind of in a range between 40, maybe down to 30 something, up to about 45 is the region that I'm working in. Volume. So volume doesn't say much, but essentially what it is it's the weight of the wheel. So how much static friction is there when you're turning, and just how heavy is the wheel in general. As it says, decreasing this makes the wheel feel lighter. That's a good thing in my book. That means that we can turn faster, we can react to oversteer, and get those wheels countersteering real quick. If the wheel is really heavy, you're going to have to use a lot of force, and you're just going to be slow. Over a long distance race, I do a lot of endurance racing, that's not going to be sustainable. I like the volume setting somewhere around 30. Now remember, I had those hotkeys. You can change the volume depending on the car you're driving. This is another one that I like to tweak a bit. Some cars should feel a little bit heavier than others. Older cars, things like that, that don't have as good of power steering would have heavier steering, so I might go a little higher on the volume. The benefit of lower volume as well is that you're going to feel the road more. You're going to feel the bumps and the curves and all those things more because the wheel isn't just planted static in the center or trying to go back to center. So tone, it's again a bit cryptic here. It says it's an open sweep from aligning torque force at force 0, where surface detail is more pronounced, to side load force at 1, where you get stronger feel in respect to the tire slip and less surface detail. So what's that mean? Basically, this is telling us what's happening to the tire. You would think you would want that really high, but actually we want it somewhere here in the range of 60 to 70. That's what I found that works best, because I like to know what the tires are doing, understeering, oversteering, slipping. But again, personal preference in that range, and that's going to vary by car as well. The FX, this is the road bumps and basically things like up and down forces, bumps, crests, curbs, things like this. We don't want too much of this. It's cool to feel those things, but again, think back to that clipping. So it says here, avoid clipping during heavy curb use. So if you crank this way up, you're going to get too much force going in, it's going to cause wheel clipping. That's bad. So we want to keep it somewhere down here around 45. Again, this is going to vary by car, but in most cases, 45 is working for me. Menu spring strength, this is just how heavy the wheel is in the menus. So on console, that's what I'm running. Again, it depends by car, and I kind of been playing around with volume and tone, but I like the informative setting. It's a nice, realistic feeling wheel to me. It's nice and smooth. It's not floppy, and it's not so rigid that you can't turn it. It's Goldilocks, just right for me. You might like something a little different, and hopefully this will help you adjust that to what you want. If you want the wheel to feel much heavier, go ahead and adjust the volume up. If you want, less feeling of the tire slipping, you can turn the tone down. I think that also is going to affect centering spring. I wish there was a distinct centering option. We'll talk about that when it comes to the profiler here in a second. So those are the console settings for you console folks. The rest of this probably isn't going to be applicable because I'm going to use the Logitech profiler here to adjust some PC settings. So on PC, I have slightly different settings that I've been running. I run a bit more gain. I run it up in the 65 region. For volume, I'm running 70. We'll get to why I use a little bit more here in a second. Tone, I've been, again, in kind of the same range, 70. And FX, I've been running 40 to 45 there. So let's go to the Logitech profiler and we'll talk about what we need to adjust. So we're here, we have our Logitech profiler here. We are going to go to global device settings. You can see I have everything at default. Like I said, we don't need to adjust wheel rotation. That's dynamically done depending on the car we're using. What I like to adjust for Project Cars 2 are these forces here. So the main ones that we need to touch are the spring effect strength, damper strength. This one's pretty critical, and the centering spring. I crank all of these down to about 10%. These are all quite strong and make the wheel too heavy. Especially the centering spring strength. This is the snapback of the wheel to center. I don't like the wheel too heavy, and when you have too much the centering spring strength, it causes the wheel to feel heavy and it's always trying to go back to center. The damping, that's the resistance to how quickly you can turn. We don't want too much of that, so I tend to run all of these much lower. That's why I can run a bit heavier gain, volume, and tone, because I'm adjusting those specific bits. Either way, both settings work. I actually am probably gonna favor my console settings just a bit, just because I jump between sims quite often, and the Logitech profiler's kind of annoying to deal with. So just having the game settings do everything could be convenient for me. Thanks for watching this video. I hope this helps. I've learned quite a bit in my 600 hours of Project Cars 2. My first steering wheel settings video was probably somewhere around here, but I've refined it since then. I know a bit more, and my video skills are a bit better. If you like this, make sure you hit the like button, consider subscribing to the channel, and as always, hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Bye for now.